History is filled with stories of war, destruction, and unimaginable suffering, but some events reveal a different kind of human strength. Imagine being trapped inside a place designed to erase hope, where every day becomes a struggle for survival, and every decision carries the weight of life or death. In such a world, fear becomes a constant companion, yet the human desire for freedom refuses to disappear. This is the emotional foundation behind Escape from Sobibor, a historical drama that explores one of the most extraordinary acts of resistance during the Second World War. What would you do if escape seemed impossible? Would you accept your fate, or would you risk everything for a chance to live? These difficult questions stand at the center of this remarkable story. The film does not simply focus on physical survival. Instead, it examines the courage required to challenge a powerful system built on cruelty and oppression. It presents a situation in which ordinary people are forced to make extraordinary choices under terrible circumstances. The story takes viewers into an environment where trust is difficult, resources are limited, and danger exists everywhere. People from different backgrounds suddenly find themselves sharing the same struggle. They carry painful memories, uncertain futures, and a common desire to reclaim their humanity. Despite constant threats, they begin to understand that cooperation may be their only opportunity to resist the forces controlling their lives. One of the most compelling aspects of this narrative is the contrast between hopelessness and determination. The camp appears to be completely controlled, leaving little room for resistance. However, beneath the surface, quiet acts of courage begin to emerge. Small conversations, secret meetings, and carefully planned actions slowly transform fear into determination. The idea of escape changes from a distant dream into a dangerous but necessary possibility. The film also highlights the importance of leadership during moments of extreme crisis. Individuals who may never have considered themselves leaders are suddenly required to guide others through impossible situations. Their decisions affect not only their own survival but also the lives of countless people around them. Through these characters, the story demonstrates how leadership can develop under the most challenging circumstances. Another powerful element is the emotional bond that forms among people facing the same tragedy. Differences in language, culture, and personal history become less important as survival becomes the shared goal. The story emphasizes that unity can become a source of strength even when people have been stripped of nearly everything else. These relationships create moments of hope in an environment designed to destroy it. Beyond the historical setting, the film raises timeless questions about human dignity and resistance. It encourages viewers to think about the value of freedom and the sacrifices people are willing to make to protect it. The narrative suggests that even under the harshest conditions, the human spirit can continue to fight against injustice. This message gives the story a lasting emotional impact that extends far beyond its historical background. As the events unfold, tension continues to increase. Every plan carries enormous risks, and every unexpected event threatens to destroy months of preparation. The uncertainty surrounding the escape attempt creates a sense of suspense that keeps the audience emotionally invested. Success is never guaranteed, and failure could lead to devastating consequences. Escape from Sobibor introduces viewers to a historical event that demonstrates both the darkest and the strongest aspects of humanity. It is a story about fear, resistance, sacrifice, and the determination to survive against overwhelming odds. Before the first attempt at escape begins, one question remains: can hope survive in a place created to eliminate it? That question drives the entire narrative and transforms this historical drama into a powerful story of courage and survival. Escape from Sobibor is a historical drama released in 1987 that presents a powerful interpretation of a real event that took place during the Second World War. Rather than focusing on large military battles or political negotiations, the film directs its attention toward a group of imprisoned people who found themselves trapped inside one of the most terrifying environments created during the war. The story explores their daily struggles, their search for hope, and their determination to survive under impossible circumstances. By concentrating on personal experiences instead of broad historical events, the film creates an emotional connection between the audience and the people at the center of the story. One of the film's greatest strengths is its realistic atmosphere. Instead of relying on dramatic visual effects or exaggerated action, the narrative builds tension through human interactions and the constant presence of danger. Every scene contributes to a growing feeling of uncertainty, reminding viewers that life inside the camp is controlled by strict rules and constant surveillance. The environment itself becomes an important part of the story, shaping the behavior, emotions, and decisions of every character. The film introduces a diverse group of individuals who come from different countries, cultures, and social backgrounds. Although they speak different languages and have different personal histories, they quickly discover that they share the same painful reality. This diversity adds depth to the narrative because it demonstrates how people who might never have met under normal circumstances are forced to depend on on one another. Their relationships become increasingly important as they begin to understand that cooperation may be their strongest weapon. Unlike many traditional war films, Escape from Sobibor does not present heroes as invincible figures. Instead, the characters are portrayed as ordinary people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. They experience fear, grief, confusion, and uncertainty. Their weaknesses make them more believable and allow the audience to understand the emotional pressure they face. The film suggests that courage does not always appear in dramatic moments. Sometimes, courage develops slowly through difficult decisions and a refusal to abandon hope. The narrative also examines the psychological effects of imprisonment and oppression. The people inside the camp live under constant pressure, and this environment influences every aspect of their daily lives. Trust becomes difficult because betrayal can have deadly consequences. At the same time, complete isolation becomes impossible because survival often depends on working together. This conflict between fear and cooperation creates much of the film's emotional and dramatic tension. Another important feature of the film is its focus on organization and planning. The story carefully demonstrates how resistance movements develop under dangerous conditions. Instead of presenting escape as a sudden or impulsive decision, the narrative highlights the patience, communication, and strategic thinking required to challenge a powerful system. This approach gives the story a sense of realism and encourages viewers to appreciate the complexity of the characters' actions. The film also serves as an introduction to a lesser-known historical event. Many stories from the Second World War focus on famous battles and military leaders, but this narrative explores a different aspect of history. It brings attention to the experiences of people whose stories are often overlooked in popular discussions about the war. By doing so, the film encourages viewers to expand their understanding of history and consider the personal experiences hidden behind historical statistics and official records. Throughout the film, the relationship between hope and despair remains a central theme. The camp represents a place where hope is constantly threatened, yet the desire for freedom continues to survive. The characters repeatedly face situations that test their emotional strength, forcing them to decide whether they should accept their circumstances or continue resisting them. This emotional conflict gives the story a deeper meaning that extends beyond its historical setting. From beginning to end, Escape from Sobibor combines history, drama, and human resilience into a compelling narrative. It is not simply a story about escaping from a dangerous location. It is a story about preserving human dignity in the face of cruelty, building trust in an environment shaped by fear, and proving that determination can survive even under the harshest conditions. These elements transform the film into an unforgettable exploration of courage, sacrifice, and the universal desire for freedom. To understand the events portrayed in Escape from Sobibor, it is important to examine the historical environment in which the story takes place. The Second World War was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history, involving numerous countries across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives as governments fought for territory, political influence, and military control. However, behind the military campaigns and changing borders, another tragedy was developing that would permanently shape modern history. During the war, large populations across occupied Europe experienced severe restrictions, forced relocation, imprisonment, and systematic persecution. Entire communities were separated from their homes and transported to unfamiliar places under strict control. Families were divided, personal property was confiscated, and many people suddenly found themselves living in conditions that destroyed their sense of security. These policies affected countless individuals and transformed everyday life into a constant struggle for survival. The story represented in the film emerged from this wider historical situation. Across occupied territories, transportation networks were used to move prisoners from one location to another. Long journeys under extremely difficult conditions became a painful reality for many people. These forced movements disrupted communities, destroyed family connections, and created an atmosphere of uncertainty. People often had little information about where they were being taken or what awaited them at their destinations. Life inside detention facilities during the war varied from place to place, but many locations shared common characteristics. Strict rules controlled daily activities, personal freedom disappeared, and individuals lived under continuous supervision. Basic necessities became difficult to obtain, and every aspect of life was influenced by fear and uncertainty. In these environments, maintaining physical and emotional strength became an enormous challenge. Despite these harsh conditions, acts of resistance appeared throughout many occupied regions. Resistance took different forms, including secret communication, the sharing of information, the protection of vulnerable individuals, and organized efforts to challenge authority. Some people participated in underground movements, while others resisted through smaller acts of defiance. These actions demonstrated that even under intense pressure, many individuals continued searching for ways to preserve their independence and protect their communities. The historical background behind escape from Sobibor also highlights the importance of solidarity. People from different nationalities, professions, and cultural traditions often found themselves facing the same hardships. Differences that once seemed significant became less important when survival depended on cooperation. Shared experiences created unexpected alliances and encouraged people to support one another despite enormous risks. Another important historical factor was the role of communication. Information became one of the most valuable resources during the war. Rumors, secret messages, and personal observations often influenced important decisions. In many situations, obtaining accurate information was extremely difficult, yet people continued searching for knowledge that could improve their chances of survival. This struggle for information became an essential part of resistance efforts in many locations. The historical setting also demonstrates how leadership can emerge during periods of extreme crisis. Individuals without formal authority sometimes became organizers, planners, and sources of inspiration for others. Their ability to encourage cooperation and maintain hope often influenced the outcome of important events. Leadership in these circumstances required courage, careful planning, and a willingness to accept personal risk for the benefit of others. The events connected to escape from Sobibor continue to attract historical interest because they represent an extraordinary example of determination under overwhelming pressure. Historians, researchers, educators, and filmmakers have studied these events to better understand how ordinary people responded to extraordinary circumstances. Their experiences provide valuable lessons about resilience, cooperation, and the importance of protecting human dignity during times of conflict. Today, the historical background presented in the film serves as more than a record of wartime events. It reminds modern audiences that history should not be reduced to dates and statistics alone. Behind every historical event are individuals whose experiences reveal the consequences of intolerance, oppression, and violence. By examining these events through a human perspective, viewers gain a deeper understanding of both the tragedies and the acts of courage that shaped one of the most significant periods of the 20th century. Sobibor was a highly restricted facility established during the Second World War in an isolated, heavily forested region of occupied Eastern Europe. Its remote location was not accidental. Dense trees, limited transportation access, and physical barriers created an environment that separated the area from nearby communities. This isolation reduced outside observation and made movement into and out of the complex extremely difficult. The location itself became an important element in maintaining secrecy and limiting opportunities for communication with the outside world. The facility was organized into several controlled sections, each designed for specific activities. Fences, guard towers, secured entrances, and clearly divided areas created a system in which movement was carefully monitored. Individuals inside the camp were not allowed to move freely, and strict regulations controlled their daily routines. Physical barriers worked together with constant supervision to create an environment where personal independence disappeared almost completely. One of the most significant characteristics of Sobibor was the atmosphere of uncertainty that surrounded it. Many new arrivals possessed little information about the location before reaching it. Confusion often became one of the most powerful psychological tools within the camp. Without reliable information, people struggled to understand their circumstances or predict what might happen next. This uncertainty affected decision-making and created a constant sense of fear. The camp functioned according to a highly organized administrative structure. Schedules, assignments, and regulations influenced every aspect of daily life. Individuals were separated into different groups based on specific tasks and responsibilities. This system created clear divisions among prisoners, while allowing authorities to maintain control over large numbers of people. The structured environment reduced personal choice and replaced it with routines designed by those in charge. Daily life inside Sobibor was shaped by physical exhaustion and emotional pressure. Basic necessities became difficult to obtain, and individuals often lived under harsh conditions that weakened both body and mind. Every day presented new challenges, including limited resources, uncertainty about the future, and the constant need to adapt to changing circumstances. The emotional burden of separation, loss, and fear added another layer of difficulty to an already unbearable situation. Despite the overwhelming control imposed within the camp, human relationships continued to develop. People formed friendships, shared information, offered emotional support, and searched for ways to maintain a sense of identity. These connections became extremely important because they helped individuals preserve hope in an environment designed to eliminate it. Simple conversations and acts of kindness sometimes provided enough encouragement to continue facing another difficult day. The isolated nature of Sobibor created significant obstacles for anyone considering resistance. Escape required much more than personal courage. Individuals needed knowledge of the surrounding environment, a detailed understanding of security procedures, and cooperation from others. The combination of physical barriers and continuous surveillance made independent escape attempts extremely dangerous. As a result, many people began to realize that any successful effort would require careful planning and collective action. The story presented in Escape from Sobibor emphasizes that the camp was more than a physical location. It represented a system built on control, fear, and the destruction of personal freedom. The characters in the film constantly struggle against these conditions while searching for opportunities to reclaim their independence. Their experiences demonstrate how powerful systems can influence human behavior while also revealing the remarkable ability of individuals to resist oppression. Another important aspect of Sobibor was its impact on memory and historical awareness. Over time, historians and researchers have examined documents, personal testimonies, and survivor accounts to better understand the events associated with the camp. These investigations have contributed to a broader understanding of wartime experiences and have helped preserve important historical evidence for future generations. Today, Sobibor remains an important historical symbol. It serves as a reminder of the consequences of hatred, intolerance, and unchecked authority. At the same time, it also represents courage, resistance, and the determination of individuals who refuse to surrender their humanity. The story associated with this place continues to inspire discussion because it demonstrates that even in the darkest moments of history, people can still find the strength to challenge impossible circumstances. The arrival at the camp marks one of the most emotionally intense moments in Escape from Sobibor. The journey itself has already exhausted many of the new prisoners, leaving them physically weak and emotionally overwhelmed. After spending hours or even days in difficult conditions, they finally reach an unfamiliar destination surrounded by fences, guards, and strict security measures. Instead of finding relief at the end of the journey, they encounter an environment filled with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. For many of the new arrivals, the first impression is deeply unsettling. The camp appears highly organized, yet almost nothing is explained clearly. People look around in an attempt to understand where they are and what will happen next. Families try to stay together while individuals search for familiar faces among the crowd. Questions spread quickly, but reliable answers remain difficult to find. This uncertainty creates an atmosphere in which anxiety grows with every passing moment. The film carefully illustrates how quickly personal identity begins to disappear after arrival. People who once lived independent lives suddenly become part of a controlled system in which their previous occupations, social positions, and personal achievements no longer seem to matter. The camp introduces a new reality in which rules are imposed without discussion, and daily life is determined by external authority. This dramatic change forces individuals to adapt to circumstances they never imagined they would face. Another important aspect of the arrival sequence is the emotional separation from the outside world. New prisoners begin to realize that the lives they once knew have been replaced by an environment governed by unfamiliar routines and constant supervision. Memories of family, home, and ordinary activities become sources of both comfort and pain. The distance between the past and the present grows larger, creating a powerful sense of isolation. The arrival also reveals the psychological strategies used to maintain control within the camp. Confusion becomes an effective tool because uncertainty limits the ability of people to organize or resist. When individuals cannot fully understand their surroundings, they often focus on immediate survival rather than long-term planning. The film demonstrates how a lack of information can become almost as powerful as physical barriers. As new arrivals begin interacting with prisoners who have already spent time in the camp, they slowly gain a better understanding of their situation. Experienced prisoners often recognize the fear and confusion visible on the faces of newcomers because they once experienced the same emotions themselves. These interactions create an important exchange of information and provide the first opportunity for many people to understand the reality of their environment. The film also emphasizes the importance of observation during these early moments. New prisoners carefully study the camp structure, the behavior of the guards, and the daily routines developing around them. Even small details become valuable, because understanding the environment can improve the chances of survival. This process of observation eventually becomes an important element in later events, as knowledge of the camp's organization proves essential for future planning. Fear dominates the atmosphere during the arrival sequence, but signs of resilience also begin to appear. Some individuals refuse to allow despair to control their actions. Instead, they concentrate on protecting one another, sharing information, and maintaining a sense of human dignity. These small acts of determination may seem insignificant at first, but they gradually become important sources of strength. The arrival at the camp serves as a turning point in the story because it introduces the central conflict that will define the entire narrative. The characters must decide how they will respond to a system designed to control every aspect of their lives. Some focus only on surviving from one day to the next, while others begin searching for opportunities to challenge their circumstances. These different responses create the foundation for the events that follow. More than anything else, this part of the film demonstrates how quickly life can change. Within a short period, ordinary people are forced into extraordinary situations that test their courage, patience, and emotional strength. The arrival sequence establishes the harsh reality of the camp while also introducing the determination that will eventually inspire one of the most remarkable acts of resistance portrayed in the story. Life inside Sobibor was defined by strict control, limited freedom, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. Every day followed a carefully regulated pattern that left very little room for personal choice. Prisoners woke up knowing that their schedules, movements, and activities would be determined by rules they could not influence. The camp functioned as a closed system in which every action was observed, and every mistake carried serious consequences. This constant pressure transformed even the simplest daily activities into difficult challenges. One of the most difficult aspects of life inside the camp was the loss of normal human routines. Before arriving at Sobibor, people had lived very different lives. They had families, professions, traditions, and personal goals. Inside the camp, those individual identities began to fade as survival became the primary concern. Ordinary experiences such as sharing meals with loved ones, walking freely, or making plans for the future suddenly became distant memories that seemed almost impossible to recover. The physical environment played an important role in shaping everyday life. High fences, guarded areas, and clearly defined boundaries constantly reminded prisoners that they were living in a place designed to restrict movement. The layout of the camp influenced how people interacted with one another and limited opportunities for communication. Even simple conversations often required caution because nobody could predict who might be listening or how information might be used. Daily life was also shaped by exhausting routines and demanding responsibilities. Physical fatigue became a constant reality for many prisoners, making it difficult to maintain both physical and emotional strength. Long hours and harsh conditions created an atmosphere in which people were forced to conserve their energy whenever possible. The struggle to endure each day became a continuous battle that required determination and mental resilience. Another significant challenge was the psychological burden created by uncertainty. Prisoners rarely possessed complete information about their circumstances, and rumors frequently spread throughout the camp. Questions about the future remained unanswered, increasing feelings of fear and anxiety. Many people lived with the painful awareness that they had lost control over their own lives. This emotional pressure often became just as difficult to endure as the physical hardships surrounding them. Despite these conditions, human relationships continued to develop. Friendships became valuable sources of emotional support, allowing people to share their experiences and encourage one another. Small acts of kindness gained enormous importance because they helped preserve a sense of humanity. A shared conversation, a gesture of assistance, or a few encouraging words could provide strength during moments of despair. These connections reminded prisoners that they were not completely alone in their struggle. Trust, however, remained a complicated issue. Fear made people cautious because they understood that careless behavior could place others in danger. Choosing whom to trust became an important decision that affected daily survival. As a result, relationships often developed slowly. People carefully observed one another before sharing personal information or discussing sensitive topics. This atmosphere of caution influenced nearly every social interaction within the camp. The film also emphasizes the role of observation in adapting to camp life. Prisoners learned to pay close attention to routines, schedules, and behavioral patterns. Understanding how the camp operated became essential, because knowledge could improve the chances of survival. People noticed details that might have seemed insignificant under normal circumstances, including changes in routines, security procedures, and movement between different areas. Over time, this careful observation provided valuable insights into the camp structure. One of the most remarkable aspects of life inside Sobibor was the gradual development of hope under extremely difficult conditions. Although fear remained a constant presence, some prisoners refused to abandon the possibility of a better future. Instead of allowing hopelessness to define their lives, they began searching for opportunities to support one another and preserve their dignity. This determination became an important force that slowly transformed passive survival into active resistance. The film presents life inside Sobibor as a powerful example of the human ability to endure extraordinary hardship. It demonstrates that even in an environment designed to eliminate freedom and individuality, people continue to protect their values, maintain their relationships, and hold on to hope. Their experiences reveal that resilience can survive under the harshest circumstances, and that the desire for freedom can remain alive even when everything else seems lost. The characters in Escape from Sobibor represent different backgrounds, personalities, and responses to an extreme situation. Instead of presenting a single heroic figure, the film builds its story around a group of individuals whose experiences gradually become connected through a common goal. Each character contributes something different to the narrative, including leadership, courage, intelligence, emotional support, or practical experience. This approach creates a more realistic portrayal of survival because it demonstrates that extraordinary achievements often depend on cooperation rather than individual action. One of the central figures in the story is a military-trained prisoner who arrives at the camp with valuable leadership experience. Unlike many of the people who have already spent a long time inside the camp, he brings a different perspective and quickly begins studying the environment around him. His ability to remain calm under pressure influences those around him and inspires confidence among people who have almost lost hope. Rather than acting impulsively, he carefully analyzes every situation and recognizes that any successful resistance effort must be based on planning and discipline. Another important character is an individual who has already become familiar with the camp's routines and daily operations. This person understands the structure of the environment and possesses information that newcomers do not have. Years of observation have provided important knowledge about movement patterns, work assignments, and security procedures. Although constant exposure to difficult conditions has created emotional scars, the desire for freedom continues to survive. This combination of experience and determination becomes extremely valuable as the story develops. The film also introduces characters who represent ordinary people suddenly placed in extraordinary circumstances. They are not soldiers, political leaders, or experienced organizers. They are individuals who once lived normal lives before being forced into a completely unfamiliar reality. Their reactions vary greatly. Some respond with fear and caution, while others demonstrate unexpected courage. These differences create emotional complexity and remind viewers that people often react differently when facing the same crisis. Several characters contribute to the story through their ability to build relationships and encourage cooperation. They understand that survival requires more than physical strength. Communication, trust, and emotional support become equally important. These individuals help reduce fear among their companions by offering encouragement and reminding others that they still possess the ability to make choices. Their influence strengthens the sense of unity that gradually develops throughout the film. The guards and authority figures also play an important role in shaping the narrative. Rather than existing only as background figures, They represent the system of controls surrounding the camp. Their presence influences every decision made by the prisoners and constantly reminds them of the dangers they face. The relationship between prisoners and authority figures creates continuous tension because every interaction carries the possibility of serious consequences. Another fascinating aspect of the film is the transformation that many characters experience over time. Individuals who initially appear uncertain gradually become more confident as they develop stronger relationships and gain a clearer understanding of their circumstances. Fear does not disappear completely, but it begins to compete with determination. This emotional evolution demonstrates how difficult experiences can reveal hidden strengths that might otherwise remain undiscovered. The film avoids presenting its characters as perfect individuals. They make mistakes, experience doubt, and struggle with difficult decisions. This realistic portrayal makes their actions more believable and allows viewers to connect with them on a deeper emotional level. Their imperfections emphasize an important message. Courage does not require the absence of fear. Instead, courage often emerges when people continue moving forward despite their fears. Relationships between characters become increasingly important as the story progresses. Friendships create support systems that help people endure emotional pressure, while shared goals encourage cooperation among individuals who might never have worked together under different circumstances. These relationships transform the camp from a collection of isolated individuals into a community united by a common purpose. Ultimately, the characters in Escape from Sobibor represent different aspects of human behavior under extreme conditions. Some provide leadership, others contribute experience, and many offer emotional strength that helps sustain hope. Together, they create a powerful portrait of resilience and demonstrate that even in an environment dominated by fear and oppression, people can still inspire one another, preserve their humanity, and work together toward freedom. Alexander Petrovsky stands at the center of Escape from Sobibor as one of the film's most influential and determined characters. He enters the story as a man whose experiences have already taught him the importance of discipline, observation, and self-control. Unlike many prisoners who have spent months adapting to the camp's harsh environment, he arrives with a different perspective and immediately begins evaluating his surroundings. His presence introduces a new source of energy into the narrative, creating a noticeable shift in the attitudes of the people around him. One of Alexander's most remarkable qualities is his ability to remain calm during moments of extreme pressure. The camp is designed to create fear and uncertainty, yet he refuses to allow these emotions to control his decisions. Instead of reacting impulsively, he carefully studies the situation and tries to understand how the camp operates. He recognizes that emotions alone cannot overcome a system built on strict organization. Careful planning, patience, and cooperation become the foundations of his approach. Leadership becomes one of Alexander's defining characteristics. However, his leadership style does not depend on authority or personal recognition. He earns the respect of others through his actions, his confidence, and his willingness to share responsibility. People begin listening to him because he demonstrates an ability to think clearly when others feel overwhelmed. His behavior creates trust, which becomes one of the most valuable resources inside the camp. The film also presents Alexander as a strategic thinker. He understands that any attempt to challenge the system will require detailed preparation and precise coordination. Every movement must be carefully considered, and every decision must account for potential risks. He encourages people to focus on practical solutions rather than allowing fear to influence their judgment. This methodical approach separates him from characters who depend entirely on emotion or desperation. Another important aspect of Alexander's character is his ability to inspire hope. Many prisoners have spent so much time under oppressive conditions that they struggle to imagine a different future. Alexander introduces the possibility that change may still be possible. He does not make unrealistic promises, nor does he ignore the dangers surrounding them. Instead, he reminds others that human beings retain the ability to act, even when their circumstances seem impossible to overcome. The relationships he develops throughout the story also reveal his understanding of teamwork. He recognizes that individual bravery alone cannot achieve meaningful results. Success depends on cooperation among people with different experiences and abilities. As a result, he spends time listening, observing, and building connections with those who possess valuable knowledge about the camp. These relationships strengthen the growing sense of unity among the prisoners. The film avoids portraying Alexander as a perfect or fearless hero. He understands the seriousness of the situation and recognizes that every decision carries enormous consequences. The possibility of failure remains present throughout the story, creating a constant emotional burden. This realistic portrayal makes his character more believable, because viewers can see the difficult choices he must make while carrying the responsibility of guiding others. Alexander's determination also highlights one of the film's central themes: the importance of preserving human dignity. Even in an environment designed to remove freedom and individuality, he refuses to surrender his sense of identity. His actions demonstrate that resistance is not always defined by physical confrontation. Sometimes resistance begins with the simple decision to reject hopelessness and continue believing in the possibility of freedom. As the story develops, Alexander becomes more than a participant in the events unfolding around him. He becomes a symbol of resilience and organized resistance. His influence extends beyond his own survival because his decisions affect the lives of many others. Through his leadership, the film illustrates how one determined individual can encourage an entire community to rediscover its courage. Ultimately, Alexander Petrovsky represents the power of leadership under extraordinary circumstances. His character demonstrates that strength is not measured only by physical ability, but also by intelligence, patience, and the capacity to inspire others. Through his actions, Escape from Sobibor presents a powerful example of how determination and cooperation can challenge even the most overwhelming obstacles. Inside Sobibor, resistance did not begin as one sudden act of rebellion. It developed slowly through fear, observation, and the growing realization that simply waiting for survival was becoming impossible. The prisoners lived under a system designed to destroy their identity and make them believe that escape was hopeless. Guards controlled nearly every part of their existence, while the camp's brutal routine created an atmosphere in which even a small mistake could have fatal consequences. Yet beneath this forced obedience, some prisoners began to think about ways to fight back. Their first form of resistance was often quiet and practical, sharing information, protecting fellow prisoners, hiding useful supplies, and trying to understand the weaknesses in the camp's security. As prisoners from different backgrounds were forced together, they gradually discovered that cooperation could give them something the camp authorities wanted to take away: trust. People who had arrived as strangers began exchanging warnings about dangerous guards, discussing possible escape routes, and quietly observing the movements of personnel around the camp. Every detail mattered. The location of fences, the timing of patrols, the behavior of guards, and the daily routines of the camp all became pieces of information that could eventually be useful. This kind of observation was extremely dangerous because anyone suspected of organizing resistance could be punished immediately. Nevertheless, the prisoners understood that knowledge was one of the few weapons still available to them. The arrival of Alexander Petrovsky, a Soviet Jewish prisoner and former Red Army officer, became an important turning point in the development of organized resistance. Unlike a spontaneous attempt by a few desperate individuals, Petrovsky understood that a successful escape would require planning, discipline, and cooperation among a large number of prisoners. His military experience helped him recognize that attacking the camp's entire system of control would offer a better chance than simply trying to break through the fences alone. The challenge was enormous because the prisoners had very limited resources, and a single person revealing the plan could place hundreds of others in danger. The resistance therefore had to remain secret. Prisoners could not openly gather in large groups or discuss their intentions where guards might hear them. Conversations had to be careful, and information was passed from one trusted person to another. This created a difficult balance between recruiting enough people to make an escape possible and keeping the plan small enough to protect it from discovery. The organizers also had to consider the prisoners who were physically weaker, elderly, or unable to move quickly. A plan that saved only a handful of people would not be enough for those who wanted to give the entire prisoner population a chance. Another important part of the developing resistance was the prisoners' understanding of the camp structure. Sobibor was not simply a prison from which someone could climb over a wall and run away. It was a carefully controlled killing center surrounded by security measures, guards, fences, mines, and the constant threat of detection. Any escape attempt had to account for what would happen after leaving the camp as well. The surrounding countryside was unfamiliar, and escapees faced the possibility of being captured by German forces or local authorities. For that reason, resistance leaders knew that freedom would not begin the moment someone crossed the camp's boundary. The real struggle would continue outside. Despite these dangers, the idea of resistance gave some prisoners a renewed sense of purpose. Instead of seeing themselves only as victims of a system that controlled their lives, they began to think of themselves as people capable of making decisions and taking action. Small acts of cooperation became meaningful because they demonstrated that the camp authorities had not completely destroyed the prisoners' ability to trust one another. The psychological importance of this change was enormous. Fear remained everywhere, but it was now accompanied by determination. The resistance also had to deal with a painful moral problem. Any escape attempt could provoke terrible consequences for prisoners who remained behind. If the guards discovered an organized conspiracy, they could respond with mass punishment or executions. This meant that planning an uprising required more than courage. It required accepting the possibility that failure could cost many innocent lives. The organizers therefore moved cautiously, looking for an opportunity when the camp's security could be disrupted and as many prisoners as possible could act at nearly the same time. As these preparations continued, the atmosphere inside Sobibor began to change. What had once seemed like an impossible dream slowly became a serious objective. The prisoners were still surrounded by fences and armed guards, but they were no longer completely passive. They were gathering information, building relationships, and searching for weaknesses. The resistance had not yet reached its decisive moment, but the foundation for a collective escape was being created. The most powerful aspect of this developing resistance was that it represented a refusal to accept the fate imposed upon the prisoners. The people inside Sobibor knew the enormous risks involved, yet they understood that doing nothing meant remaining trapped inside a place designed for their destruction. Their resistance was therefore not simply a physical struggle against fences and guards. It was also a struggle to preserve human dignity, solidarity, and the belief that they could still determine their own actions. From these small and dangerous beginnings, a much larger plan would eventually emerge, one that would transform the history of Sobibor and become one of the most remarkable acts of prisoner resistance during the Holocaust. The escape plan at Sobibor developed under conditions in which even the smallest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. The prisoners knew that simply running toward the camp's perimeter would almost certainly end in death, because the site was surrounded by fences, guards, watchtowers, and dangerous areas that made an uncontrolled escape extremely difficult. What they needed was not a reckless attempt by a few desperate people, but a coordinated operation that could give a large number of prisoners an opportunity to break out at approximately the same time. This required secrecy, careful observation, and an understanding of the camp's daily routine. Every stage had to be considered while avoiding anything that might attract the attention of the German authorities. Alexander Petrovsky played a central role in turning the idea of escape into an organized strategy. His military background gave him an understanding of discipline and coordination, while his experiences as a prisoner had shown him how dangerous Sobibor's security system could be. He recognized that the guards could not simply be confronted in an open battle. The prisoners had almost no weapons and were greatly outnumbered. Instead, the resistance needed to exploit moments when the guards would be distracted and vulnerable. The objective was to create confusion inside the camp first, allowing prisoners to move toward the perimeter before the authorities could fully understand what was happening. One of the most important ideas was to involve people with different skills and positions within the prisoner community. Some prisoners worked in areas where they could observe the camp's operations more closely, while others had access to workshops, storage areas, or information that could help the resistance. This made cooperation extremely valuable. The escape plan depended on individuals performing specific tasks while keeping the wider operation secret from people who did not need to know every detail. Such compartmentalization reduced the possibility that one frightened or compromised prisoner could reveal the entire plan. The organizers also understood that weapons would be essential if the prisoners were going to confront armed guards. Since they could not openly obtain firearms, the resistance looked for ways to acquire or improvise weapons without immediately exposing their intentions. Tools and other objects that appeared ordinary could potentially become useful during the uprising. At the same time, prisoners needed to find ways of moving through the camp without creating suspicion. The preparation therefore involved a mixture of secrecy, deception, and careful use of whatever limited resources were available. timing became another crucial element. The resistance could not simply choose any moment and expect success. The prisoners needed a period when enough guards and personnel would be positioned in predictable locations, and when the camp's routine could be disrupted. The plan eventually centered on creating a situation in which several guards could be eliminated or neutralized individually before the wider escape began. The intention was to delay the alarm long enough for the prisoners to organize themselves and reach the perimeter. If the guards realized what was happening too early, the entire operation could collapse before the majority had a chance to escape. Communication was equally important. Hundreds of prisoners could not be given a detailed explanation of the entire operation because secrecy was essential. Instead, information had to spread carefully among trusted individuals. People needed to know where they should go, when they should move, and how to respond when the escape began. This was especially difficult because the prisoners came from different countries and backgrounds, and many were exhausted by the conditions of camp life. The organizers had to create enough understanding for people to act together without allowing panic to destroy the plan. A major challenge was deciding what would happen once the prisoners reached the outside. Escaping the camp was only the first stage. Beyond the fences was unfamiliar territory, and the escapees had no guarantee that local civilians would help them. Some would have to travel through forests and fields while avoiding German patrols and other hostile forces. The prisoners therefore understood that freedom would involve another dangerous struggle. Nevertheless, escaping into uncertainty was preferable to remaining in a camp whose purpose was their destruction. The planners also faced the heartbreaking reality that not everyone would be able to escape. Some prisoners were too weak to move quickly, while others had responsibilities or personal circumstances that complicated their decisions. The resistance leaders hoped to create an opportunity for as many people as possible, but they could not guarantee everyone's survival. This made the operation emotionally difficult. Each person had to decide whether to risk joining the escape, knowing that remaining behind could also be fatal as the preparations advanced. The escape plan became more than a secret discussed among a small group. It became a carefully constructed operation built around surprise and collective action. The prisoners had little equipment, almost no conventional military power, and no certainty about what awaited them outside. What they did possess was determination, knowledge of the camp, and an increasing willingness to cooperate. Their greatest advantage was the possibility of turning the entire prisoner population into a force too large to be easily controlled. The plan ultimately depended on one essential principle: speed and surprise could compensate, at least partially, for the prisoners' lack of weapons and resources. If the guards could be caught off balance, if the alarm could be delayed, and if enough prisoners moved at once, there was a possibility of breaking through the camp's security system. It was an extraordinarily dangerous gamble, but the prisoners understood that waiting offered little hope. By preparing together and accepting enormous personal risks, they transformed an impossible-looking dream into a real escape operation. The stage was now being set for one of the most significant prisoner uprisings of the Holocaust, as the resistance movement at Sobibor became more organized. One of its greatest challenges was bringing additional prisoners into the plan without exposing the secret. The organizers understood that a successful escape could not depend on only a small group. The camp was heavily guarded, and anyone attempting to escape alone would face almost impossible odds. A mass uprising offered a much better possibility, but involving hundreds of people created another danger. The larger the circle of people who knew about the plan, the greater the chance that someone might accidentally reveal it. Recruitment therefore had to be handled with extreme caution. Trust became the foundation of the recruitment process. Prisoners could not simply approach everyone and explain what was being planned. Instead, organizers relied on people they already knew or individuals who had demonstrated courage, reliability, and a willingness to protect others. Conversations were often indirect, with resistance members trying to understand whether another prisoner could be trusted before revealing sensitive information. This process was especially difficult because life inside Sobibor had created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. A person might be terrified of the consequences of an uprising, and even an innocent reaction could potentially place the entire group in danger. The organizers also recognized that different prisoners could contribute in different ways. Not everyone needed to be involved in the same part of the operation. Some had useful skills because of their work assignments, while others understood the camp's routines or had knowledge of particular areas. Workers in workshops could be valuable because they had access to tools and materials. People who moved around different sections could observe guard movements and communicate information. Others could help spread instructions when the moment arrived. In this way, the resistance gradually developed into a network rather than a single group with everyone knowing everything. Petrovsky and other organizers also had to consider the psychological state of the prisoners they approached. Many had witnessed or experienced unimaginable suffering, and some had lost relatives and friends shortly before arriving at the camp. Fear could easily overpower the desire to resist. For some prisoners, the idea of attempting an escape sounded almost impossible because the consequences of failure were so severe. The organizers therefore needed to convince people that collective action offered a chance that individual resistance could not. The objective was not to promise safety because nobody could honestly guarantee that, but to create the possibility of survival through unity. Recruitment also involved people from different national and cultural backgrounds. Sobibor contained prisoners from several parts of occupied Europe, and communication between them was not always simple. Yet the shared danger created a powerful common purpose. Regardless of their language or country of origin, they understood what the camp represented. The resistance gradually crossed these divisions, demonstrating that cooperation could emerge even in circumstances specifically designed to isolate and dehumanize prisoners. An important part of recruitment was keeping the wider prisoner population unaware of the exact details until the appropriate moment. The organizers knew that too much information could cause panic. If hundreds of people began behaving differently before the escape, the guards might notice something unusual. Therefore, many prisoners were prepared only enough to respond when the uprising began. This allowed the resistance to maintain a degree of secrecy while still creating a large group capable of moving quickly when the opportunity appeared. The recruitment process also required courage from those who accepted the invitation. Joining the resistance meant accepting the possibility of immediate death. A prisoner who agreed to participate was not simply making a political statement. They were taking part in an operation where failure could bring terrible consequences for themselves and others. Yet many understood that Sobibor was already a place where survival was uncertain. For them, resistance became a way of reclaiming some control over their own fate. As more prisoners became involved, the atmosphere inside the camp subtly changed. People who had previously felt completely powerless discovered that they were not alone. A secret connection existed beneath the surface of everyday camp life. Prisoners continued carrying out their forced duties and following orders, but behind that appearance, preparations were taking shape. The knowledge that others were willing to fight for their freedom created a sense of solidarity that the camp authorities could not easily eliminate. The recruitment effort was therefore much more than simply gathering numbers for an escape. It was about building trust among people who had been placed under extraordinary pressure. Every new participant strengthened the potential uprising, but also increased the responsibility of those organizing it. The resistance had to balance two competing needs. Enough people had to be ready to act, yet the secret had to remain protected until the decisive moment. By the time the uprising approached, the resistance had developed a broad base of prisoners who understood that their best chance lay in acting together. They came from different backgrounds, possessed different skills, and had endured different experiences, but they were united by the same urgent goal. The organizers had transformed individual fear into collective determination. What began as a small and dangerous idea had gradually become a coordinated movement, preparing hundreds of prisoners for the moment when they would finally attempt to break through Sobibor's deadly system of control. Once the resistance at Sobibor had gained enough support, the prisoners faced another difficult problem. They needed to create an opportunity in which escape could actually become possible. The camp was designed to prevent exactly that. Guards were positioned to monitor movement, fences separated prisoners from the outside world, and the surrounding area made any unauthorized departure extremely dangerous. A direct attack against the camp's defenses would have been almost impossible for people who possessed few weapons and little physical strength after months of brutal conditions. The resistance therefore focused on finding moments of weakness within the camp's normal routine. The prisoners began paying closer attention to the daily habits of the guards and camp personnel. Routine was one of the few things they could study without immediately attracting suspicion. Guards tended to follow predictable patterns, work assignments occurred at particular times, and different areas of the camp became more or less active depending on the hour. By carefully observing these patterns, the the resistance could identify situations in which security might temporarily become less effective. This information was not useful by itself, but when combined with careful planning, it could become a major advantage point. One of the most important ideas was to avoid creating an obvious disturbance too early. The resistance understood that the guards had superior weapons and could quickly react if they realized an uprising was beginning. A premature confrontation could therefore destroy the entire plan. Instead, the prisoners looked for ways to make their actions appear ordinary until the critical moment. Maintaining normal behavior was itself a form of resistance because it allowed preparations to continue beneath the surface without immediately alerting the authorities. The prisoners also made use of the different work assignments within the camp. Forced labor placed some prisoners in areas where they could observe equipment, buildings, supplies, and guard movements more closely than others. These positions provided valuable information. People who worked in workshops or other practical areas could also identify materials that might be useful during an escape. Such opportunities had to be used carefully because even an apparently harmless object could become suspicious if a guard noticed it being taken or moved without explanation. Another way of creating an opportunity was through deception. The resistance understood that the guards did not need to be defeated everywhere at once if they could first be placed in situations where they were isolated or distracted. The organizers began considering how individual guards might be separated from larger groups and brought into circumstances where prisoners could act against them without immediately raising the alarm. This approach required precise coordination because an unexpected event could cause the entire operation to collapse. The psychological preparation of the prisoners was equally important. An escape involving a large number of people could easily become chaotic if fear took control. The organizers therefore needed prisoners to understand that hesitation at the wrong moment could be dangerous. At the same time, they could not reveal every detail to everyone because secrecy remained essential. The challenge was to create confidence without creating panic. Prisoners had to believe that collective action was possible while remaining prepared for sudden changes in circumstances. The resistance also understood that an opportunity would have to be large enough to benefit more than a few individuals. A successful escape was not simply about finding a hidden route through a fence. The goal was to create a brief period during which a significant portion of the prisoner population could move toward freedom. This meant that the operation had to connect several elements: the neutralization of key guards, the rapid movement of prisoners, the disruption of communication, and the crossing of the camp's perimeter before the authorities could fully respond at the same time. The prisoners had to think about what would happen beyond the camp. Even if they succeeded in getting through the fences, the outside world presented enormous dangers. Escapees would have to scatter, find places to hide, cross unfamiliar terrain, and avoid forces searching for them. Some would depend on forests or sympathetic individuals, while others would have to travel alone. The resistance could not guarantee survival after the escape, but it could increase the chances by making sure that prisoners were not all trapped inside the camp when the alarm was raised. As preparations continued, the ordinary routine of Sobibor became increasingly important to the resistance. The very system intended to control the prisoners also created patterns that could be studied and eventually exploited. The guards believed they understood the camp's rhythm, but the prisoners were quietly learning the same rhythm from another perspective. Every repeated movement, every predictable assignment, and every moment of reduced attention added another piece to the developing plan. The creation of these opportunities required patience. The resistance could not afford to act simply because an opportunity looked promising. They had to consider whether enough prisoners were ready, whether the guards could be controlled, and whether the escape could begin before the alarm spread. This made the waiting period extremely tense. The prisoners knew that the longer they waited, the greater the possibility that their plans might be discovered, but acting too soon could be equally disastrous. Eventually, the resistance reached a point where the opportunity they had been preparing for could no longer be treated as a distant possibility. The prisoners had studied the camp, built a network of cooperation, gathered what resources they could, and prepared themselves psychologically for a dangerous confrontation. The plan depended on surprise, speed, and collective action. For the first time, the possibility of breaking out of Sobibor was no longer merely an idea discussed in secret. It was becoming a realistic operation that could soon change the lives of everyone involved. What made this stage particularly powerful was the way ordinary prisoners turned the limited choices available to them into tools of resistance. They had almost no control over the larger system surrounding them, but they could observe, cooperate, communicate, and prepare. Through these small acts, they created the conditions for something much larger. The escape would ultimately depend on a single decisive moment, but that moment was being built through countless quiet decisions made by prisoners who refused to surrender their hope of freedom. The day of the revolt at Sobibor arrived after weeks of careful preparation, secrecy, and intense psychological pressure. By October 14, 1943, the prisoners involved in the resistance understood that there could be no easy return once the operation began. Their plan depended on surprise and coordination, because they were confronting an armed camp administration with very limited resources of their own. The atmosphere inside Sobibor appeared ordinary on the surface, but beneath that routine was a carefully organized uprising involving prisoners who had decided that risking everything was preferable to remaining trapped in a killing center. The resistance had selected a strategy designed to create confusion before the guards could understand what was happening. Rather than beginning with a loud attack that would immediately activate the entire security system, the conspirators sought to deal with selected German and auxiliary personnel individually. The purpose was to obtain weapons, reduce the number of immediate threats, and delay the discovery of the revolt. This required extraordinary discipline because every participant had to remain calm and behave normally until the agreed moment. During the early stages, several resistance members carried out their assigned tasks while attempting to avoid suspicion. The prisoners continued working and moving around the camp as they normally would. Meanwhile, members of the underground organization were watching the situation closely and waiting for signals that the operation could proceed. The tension must have been immense. A single unexpected guard appearance, an unexplained movement, or a failure to follow the plan could have exposed the entire conspiracy. The resistance managed to kill several German personnel and obtain weapons during the initial phase. These actions were a critical part of the strategy, because the prisoners needed some means of defending themselves once the revolt became open. However, the plan was never completely under their control. At some point, the authorities began to realize that something unusual was happening, and the element of surprise started to disappear. The prisoners now had to move quickly before the camp could be placed under full defensive control. When the escape finally became visible, prisoners began moving toward the perimeter in large numbers. What had been a secret operation suddenly became a mass attempt at freedom. Men, women, and other prisoners ran through areas of the camp while trying to avoid guards and security obstacles. The situation quickly became chaotic because hundreds of people were attempting to escape simultaneously. Some followed the planned routes while others reacted to whatever opening they could find. The perimeter presented one of the most dangerous stages of the revolt. Sobibor's surrounding defenses were not designed to allow anyone to leave, and the prisoners had to cross fences and dangerous areas while under threat of armed resistance. Some prisoners were killed during the attempt, while others managed to break through. The scale of the movement made it impossible for the authorities to stop everyone immediately, but it also meant that the escapees faced enormous risks once they were outside the central camp area. Petrosky's leadership became particularly important during this critical moment. The uprising could easily have dissolved into individual panic, but the resistance had prepared prisoners to understand that their best chance depended on continuing forward. Once outside the camp, many escapees had to scatter because remaining together would make them easier targets for pursuing forces. The forests and surrounding countryside offered concealment, but they also created new difficulties because most prisoners had little knowledge of the area. Not everyone was able to escape. Some prisoners were killed during the revolt, while others were unable to reach the perimeter in time. The uprising therefore carried an enormous human cost even though it succeeded in breaking the camp system of control. For those who made it through, the danger was far from over. German authorities and local forces began searching for escapees, and the prisoners had to make desperate decisions about where to hide and whom they could trust. The revolt also demonstrated how quickly a carefully planned operation could become unpredictable. The resistance had prepared for many possibilities, but a mass escape inevitably created confusion. People became separated from friends and relatives, planned routes were disrupted, and individuals had to make decisions independently. Some escapees entered forests, while others sought assistance from people outside the camp. Their chances of survival depended on circumstances that the organizers could not control. Yet despite the chaos and tragic losses, the revolt achieved something that had seemed almost impossible. Hundreds of prisoners managed to break out of Sobibor. The camp system, which had been designed to make resistance appear futile, had been challenged from within by the very people it was intended to destroy. The uprising became one of the most significant acts of resistance carried out by prisoners in a Nazi killing center. The day of the revolt therefore stands as both a story of courage and a reminder of the terrible circumstances that made such an act necessary. The prisoners were not trained soldiers entering a conventional battlefield. They were victims of a system of mass murder, who had very limited resources and almost no protection. Their decision to resist required them to face overwhelming danger, knowing that failure could mean death. Their escape was not a simple victory, because many lives were lost, but it demonstrated the extraordinary determination of people who refused to surrender completely to their captors. By the end of October 14th, Sobibor had been transformed. The prisoners who escaped were no longer simply trying to survive inside the camp. They were running for their lives through occupied territory. Behind them was a killing center, whose operation had been violently disrupted. Ahead was an uncertain journey filled with danger. The revolt had opened the door to freedom, but survival would now depend on what each escapee could do in the days and months that followed. The uprising at Sobibor entered its most dangerous phase when the carefully hidden resistance suddenly became an open struggle for freedom. For months, the prisoners had lived under a system designed to convince them that escape was impossible. On October 14, 1943, that belief was challenged when the underground group put its preparations into action. The objective was not to defeat the entire camp administration in a conventional battle, because the prisoners lacked the weapons and numbers required for such a confrontation. Instead, the resistance depended on surprise, coordination, and the ability to create enough confusion for a large number of prisoners to reach the outside world. The first stage of the operation involved secretly attacking selected German personnel and taking control of weapons wherever possible. Several members of the camp staff were killed during these coordinated actions. The resistance hoped to accomplish this before the authorities understood that a larger revolt was being organized. For a short period, the plan appeared to be working. Prisoners continued moving through the camp while the resistance quietly carried out its assigned tasks. The success of these early actions gave the organizers a chance to gather weapons and prepare for the much more dangerous phase that would follow. However, the situation soon became more complicated. The revolt could not remain hidden forever, and once the guards began recognizing that something unusual was happening, the prisoners had to move before the camp could be fully sealed. The carefully controlled operation quickly turned into a mass breakout. Prisoners began rushing toward the perimeter, knowing that hesitation could leave them trapped inside. The atmosphere changed from secret preparation to desperate movement, with people attempting to escape through whatever opening appeared available. For many prisoners, this was the first time they had openly challenged the physical boundaries of Sobibor. The fences that had represented an almost impossible barrier were suddenly being approached by hundreds of people at once. Some prisoners attempted to cross through damaged sections, while others searched for alternative routes. The surrounding security system created additional dangers, and armed guards fired at people trying to escape. The prisoners had to move despite the fear and confusion because stopping could mean being captured or killed. The breakout was not a perfectly organized procession. Once hundreds of frightened people began running at the same time, control became difficult. Some prisoners stayed with friends or relatives, while others became separated in the confusion. People who had received different instructions were suddenly forced to make decisions based on what they could see around them. Some managed to follow paths toward the forest, while others became trapped by fences or exposed to gunfire. The difference between escape and death could come down to a matter of seconds. The surrounding minefields and security barriers created another deadly obstacle. Prisoners knew very little about the exact dangers beyond the perimeter, and in the panic of the escape, some entered areas that had been deliberately protected to prevent escape. Others managed to find safer routes or simply took enormous risks to reach the forest. The breakout therefore involved not only confronting armed personnel but also navigating a landscape designed to stop fleeing prisoners. Alexander Petrovsky's role became especially important during the transition from revolt to escape. The resistance needed prisoners to understand that reaching the outside was only the beginning. Once beyond the camp, remaining in a large group could attract attention, while moving too slowly could allow pursuers to catch them. The escapees therefore had to scatter and seek concealment. The forest became a place of temporary refuge, but it also presented the uncertainty of survival without food, shelter, maps, or reliable knowledge of the surrounding territory. Not everyone survived the breakout. Some prisoners were shot while attempting to cross the camp's defenses, while others were killed by mines or later captured during the search. These losses were a tragic reminder of how dangerous the operation had been. The uprising created a genuine opportunity for freedom, but it could not erase the enormous risks created by the Nazi security system and the hostile environment surrounding Sobibor. For those who escaped successfully, a new struggle began almost immediately. They had to avoid German patrols and local forces while searching for places where they could hide. Some escaped in small groups while others traveled alone. Their survival depended on luck, physical endurance, and the willingness of people outside the camp to provide assistance. Every sound or unfamiliar movement could create fear that the search had reached them. The significance of the breakout went beyond the number of people who escaped. Sobibor had been created as part of the Nazi system of mass murder, and its prisoners were not expected to challenge the machinery operating there. Yet they organized themselves, obtained weapons, attacked members of the camp staff, and broke through the perimeter. Their actions demonstrated that even under extreme conditions, prisoners could organize collective resistance against their captors. The uprising also changed the fate of Sobibor itself. The revolt contributed to the decision to shut down the killing center. The camp was dismantled, the remaining structures were destroyed, and efforts were made to erase evidence of what had taken place there. But the prisoners who escaped carried the memory of Sobibor with them. Their experiences would later provide important testimony about the camp and the people who had been murdered there. The breakout was therefore both a desperate escape and an extraordinary act of resistance. It did not end the suffering of everyone involved, and many prisoners died during or after the uprising. Nevertheless, the revolt shattered the assumption that the camp's prisoners could be controlled without resistance. Those who reached freedom had survived an environment designed to deny them any future, and their escape became one of the most powerful examples of organized prisoner resistance during the Holocaust. One of the most terrifying stages of the Sobibor breakout came when escaping prisoners encountered the heavily protected area surrounding the camp. The prisoners knew that reaching the outer fence did not automatically mean they were safe. The Nazis had established additional barriers to discourage escape, including areas containing landmines. During the uprising, hundreds of desperate people were forced to move through a landscape where they could not always see the dangers beneath their feet. In the confusion of the breakout, the difference between a safe path and a deadly one could be impossible to recognize. The minefield created a particularly cruel obstacle because it turned the ground itself into a weapon. Prisoners escaping from Sobibor were already under pressure from armed guards, fences, and watch positions. Now they also had to consider where they placed every step. There was no reliable way for many of them to identify every dangerous area while running for their lives. Panic made the situation even more difficult, because a large crowd moving quickly could not easily stop, change direction, or warn everyone behind them as the prisoners reached the outer areas. Some tried to follow routes that appeared to have fewer obstacles. Others moved toward the forest, believing that trees and natural cover would provide protection from pursuing guards. The forest represented hope because it offered concealment, but reaching it required crossing the dangerous space around the camp. Prisoners had to make rapid decisions without knowing whether the route ahead was safe. Some followed people who seemed to know the way, while others simply ran toward whatever opening they could find. The presence of mines also contributed to the chaos of the escape. When explosions occurred, those nearby could not always understand what had happened. A sudden blast could cause people to stop, change direction, or become separated from their companions. At the same time, armed guards were still trying to prevent the prisoners from leaving. The escapees therefore faced multiple threats at once, and there was no protected route that guaranteed survival. For prisoners who had spent months under brutal conditions, the physical demands of the escape were enormous. Many were exhausted, underfed, injured, or emotionally overwhelmed. Yet the possibility of freedom gave them a reason to continue moving. Some ran despite their physical limitations, while others struggled to keep up with relatives or friends. The minefield made every attempt more dangerous because physical exhaustion increased the possibility of losing balance, choosing the wrong direction, or becoming trapped in an exposed area. The tragedy of the minefield was that the prisoners were not simply escaping from a conventional prison. They were fleeing a killing center whose entire environment had been designed to prevent survival. The fences, guards, barriers, and mines formed layers of protection around a place where thousands of people had already been murdered. Breaking through those defenses therefore represented a direct challenge to the system that had been created to keep the victims isolated from the outside world. Some prisoners managed to reach safer ground and continue toward the forest. Once they were beyond the immediate perimeter, they still could not relax. The authorities would soon begin searching the surrounding countryside, and the escapees had to disappear before organized pursuit reached them. For many, the forest became the next stage of survival. They had escaped one deadly environment only to enter another situation where hunger, exposure, fear, and capture remained constant threats. The minefield also became a symbol of the enormous price paid for freedom. The prisoners had planned the uprising carefully, but no plan could eliminate every danger. The breakout was happening under extreme pressure, and the physical defenses around Sobibor were designed specifically to make mass escape almost impossible. Every prisoner who crossed those barriers was taking a tremendous risk, knowing that freedom might be only a few steps away or that death could come without warning. Despite the losses, a significant number of prisoners succeeded in crossing the camp's outer defenses. Their survival proved that the security system could be breached when hundreds of people acted together. The escape was chaotic and tragic, but it prevented the camp authorities from keeping every prisoner trapped inside. Those who reached the surrounding countryside carried with them the story of what had happened at Sobibor and became living witnesses to the resistance. The minefield escape therefore represents one of the most dangerous moments in the entire uprising. It was not a simple race toward freedom, but a desperate journey through a landscape filled with hidden threats. Every step carried uncertainty, yet the prisoners continued forward, because turning back meant returning to a place built for their destruction. Their determination to cross that deadly perimeter became an unforgettable part of the Sobibor revolt, showing the extraordinary courage required to choose freedom when almost every path toward it was filled with danger. Once the prisoners had escaped from Sobibor, their struggle entered a completely different phase. The fences were behind them, but freedom was still uncertain. The surrounding territory was controlled by German forces, and the escapees knew that search parties would soon be looking for them. Many had no maps, reliable supplies, or clear knowledge of the safest route. They had to leave the immediate area as quickly as possible while avoiding roads, settlements, and anyone who might report their presence. For people who had spent so long under captivity, the open countryside offered freedom, but it also brought an unfamiliar kind of fear. The escaped prisoners gradually separated into smaller groups. Remaining together could provide emotional support, but a large group would also be easier for pursuers to detect. Some people stayed with relatives or trusted friends, while others were forced to continue alone after becoming separated during the chaotic breakout. The forest became especially important because its trees and dense vegetation could provide temporary concealment. Yet hiding in the woods was not a permanent solution. The escapees needed food, water, shelter, and information, all while knowing that discovery could mean capture or death. Alexander Petrovsky understood that survival would require constant movement and caution. The prisoners could no longer depend on the organization that had protected them inside Sobibor. Each group now had to make decisions according to its own circumstances. Some sought routes toward areas where resistance groups might be active, while others searched for people who might provide shelter. Their chances varied greatly. Language, appearance, clothing, physical condition, and knowledge of the local area could all affect whether an escapee attracted suspicion. The search for freedom was also a deeply emotional experience. Many survivors had just witnessed friends being killed during the uprising or had been separated from loved ones in the confusion. The excitement of escaping was therefore mixed with grief. Every successful step away from Sobibor could remind them of those who had not made it out. Some continued because they wanted to survive as witnesses, while others were motivated by the hope of finding family members or joining people who were still fighting against Nazi occupation. Food quickly became a major concern. Prisoners who had escaped had limited supplies, and the countryside could not be treated as a safe source of nourishment. They had to search for whatever food they could obtain while avoiding unnecessary contact with strangers. Hunger weakened people who were already physically exhausted. Those who had injuries or poor health faced an even greater challenge because they could not travel as quickly or hide as easily as stronger escapees. The danger of betrayal was constant. In occupied territory, the escapees could not assume that every civilian would help them. Some people were afraid of German punishment, while others were hostile toward Jews or willing to cooperate with the authorities. Even someone who appeared friendly could potentially expose an escapee's location. This forced survivors to make difficult judgments about whom they could trust. A decision made in desperation could determine whether a person survived or was captured. For Petrovsky and other survivors, reaching areas controlled by Soviet forces or joining partisan groups offered a greater possibility of long-term survival. However, reaching such places was itself dangerous. The escapees had to cross territory where military operations, patrols, checkpoints, and searches were common. Their journey was therefore not a straightforward path from captivity to safety. It was a prolonged struggle in which every stage required patience and courage. Some survivors eventually found assistance from people outside the camp. Acts of kindness could make an enormous difference, providing food, clothing, shelter, or directions. These moments demonstrated that the world beyond Sobibor was not entirely defined by the cruelty the prisoners had experienced. Yet such assistance was never guaranteed, and many survivors had to remain hidden for long periods before finding dependable protection. The search for freedom also transformed the meaning of survival. Inside Sobibor, survival meant enduring one day at a time under direct control. Outside, survival meant making independent decisions. The escapees had to choose where to go, when to move, whom to approach, and when to remain hidden. They were no longer following orders from guards. They were attempting to rebuild control over their own lives. Even simple choices such as walking through a forest or deciding where to sleep became expressions of freedom. The journey also carried the burden of memory. The survivors knew that the world needed to learn what had happened inside Sobibor. Every person who escaped represented a potential witness to the crimes committed there. Their survival therefore had historical importance beyond their individual lives. By remaining alive, they could eventually describe the camp, the victims, the resistance, and the uprising to a world that might otherwise have known far less about what had occurred. For many escapees, freedom was not immediately experienced as peace. Fear remained with them long after they crossed the camp's perimeter. They could hear sounds in the distance and wonder whether pursuers were approaching. A stranger could appear threatening, and every unexpected movement could create suspicion. The psychological effects of captivity did not disappear simply because the fences were gone. Freedom had to be discovered gradually through continued survival. The search for freedom after Sobibor was therefore a journey through uncertainty rather than a single victorious moment. The prisoners had escaped the camp, but they still had to survive the occupied countryside and the relentless search for those who had escaped. Some found refuge and lived through the war, while others were captured or killed. Their different experiences reflected the unpredictable dangers of the Holocaust's final years. Ultimately, the escapees' determination to keep moving represented the deepest meaning of the Sobibor revolt. They were not simply running away from a physical location. They were fighting to recover the future that the Nazi system had tried to take from them. Every forest crossed, every hiding place found, and every dangerous journey completed was another rejection of the fate imposed upon them. Their search for freedom continued long after the revolt ended, and the stories of those who survived became an enduring testimony to courage, resistance, and the human will to live. Escaping from Sobibor was only the beginning of the survivors' struggle. Once they crossed the camp's perimeter, they entered a dangerous world where German forces were actively searching for those who had escaped. The prisoners had won a brief chance at freedom, but they were still surrounded by the realities of Nazi-occupied Poland. They had to remain hidden, find food and shelter, avoid patrols, and determine where they could safely travel. For many, the first hours and days after the revolt were filled with uncertainty because nobody knew how extensive the search would become. The escapees did not all follow the same path. Some moved through forests in small groups, believing that natural cover would provide protection from patrols. Others tried to reach people who might be willing to hide them. A few sought contact with Soviet partisan groups or attempted to make their way toward areas where Soviet forces might eventually provide protection. The choices available to each survivor depended heavily on location, physical condition, personal relationships, and luck. A route that seemed safe for one group could become deadly for another. Remaining hidden was often more difficult than it sounds. The survivors had to avoid drawing attention to themselves while moving through a region where unfamiliar people could easily become suspicious. Many escapees had no proper civilian clothing and little knowledge of the local area. They had to be extremely careful when approaching villages, farms, or roads. Even basic needs such as obtaining water could become dangerous if doing so exposed their location. Survival required patience and the ability to recognize when movement was safer than staying in one place. Food was another major challenge. The prisoners had escaped with very limited supplies, and many were already weakened by months of starvation and forced labor. Their bodies needed rest and nourishment, but stopping for too long could increase the risk of capture. Some survivors depended on sympathetic civilians, while others searched for whatever food they could obtain without revealing themselves. The physical consequences of camp life made this period especially difficult because exhaustion could turn an ordinary journey into a life-threatening ordeal. The danger of capture remained constant. German authorities treated the escaped prisoners as a serious threat and conducted searches in the surrounding region. The survivors knew that being discovered could mean immediate execution or return to captivity. As a result, they had to listen carefully for signs of approaching patrols and avoid predictable routes. Some moved mostly at night, using darkness as protection, while remaining hidden during the day whenever possible. Trust became one of the most important factors in survival. An escapee could not simply assume that a stranger would offer assistance. Some local people were willing to help, while others were frightened of German retaliation or unwilling to risk their own safety. Survivors therefore had to make difficult judgments about whom they could approach. A sympathetic person might provide food or shelter that made the difference between life and death, but an untrustworthy contact could expose an entire group. For those who remained together, companionship provided both practical and emotional support. Friends could help injured prisoners, share food, keep watch, and encourage one another during moments of despair. At the same time, staying together could create additional risks because a larger group was easier to notice. This forced survivors to balance the security of companionship against the advantages of moving quietly in smaller numbers. Alexander Petchersky and other survivors eventually became connected with Soviet partisan activity, offering them a greater opportunity to continue resisting the German occupation. Petchersky's military experience was particularly valuable because he understood the importance of organization, discipline, and movement under dangerous conditions. For survivors who joined resistance networks, the struggle did not simply become a search for personal safety. It became another form of opposition to the forces that had destroyed their communities. Yet not every escapee experienced the same outcome. Some were captured or killed in the aftermath of the revolt. Others survived the war by hiding with civilians, joining resistance groups, or finding other forms of protection. Their different experiences demonstrate how unpredictable survival could be during the occupation. Escaping Sobibor increased a person's chances of living, but it could never guarantee safety. The psychological struggle was just as significant as the physical one. The survivors had left behind a place where they had witnessed systematic murder, separation, cruelty, and unimaginable suffering. Freedom did not erase those memories. Many survivors carried grief for relatives and friends who had been killed. They also carried the responsibility of remembering what they had seen. The outside world could appear strangely ordinary compared with Sobibor, yet the survivors knew that their previous lives had been permanently changed. For some, surviving meant more than simply staying alive until the end of the war. It meant becoming witnesses. The prisoners who escaped carried knowledge about the camp that could not easily be replaced. They could describe the organization of Sobibor, the conditions faced by prisoners, the crimes committed there, and the details of the revolt. Their testimony became an important part of preserving the historical record and ensuring that the victims would not disappear into silence. The fate of Sobibor itself also became part of the survivors' story. After the uprising, the Nazis moved to dismantle the killing center and destroy evidence of its existence. The physical camp was transformed in an attempt to conceal what had happened there. But the escapees had already carried the truth beyond the camp's boundaries. Their survival made it impossible to completely erase the history of Sobibor. In the end, survival after the escape was a continuation of the same struggle that had begun inside the camp. The struggle to preserve life and human dignity in the face of a system determined to destroy both. The prisoners had broken through the physical barriers of Sobibor, but they still had to overcome hunger, fear, pursuit, uncertainty, and grief. Those who survived did more than escape a killing center. They carried forward the memories of thousands who never had the opportunity to leave. Their survival became one of the most powerful consequences of the revolt. Every survivor represented a life that the Nazi system had intended to eliminate, and every testimony became evidence of what had occurred. The escape, therefore, cannot be understood only as a dramatic moment of running beyond the camp's fences. It was also the beginning of a long and difficult journey in which survivors fought to remain alive, preserve their memories, and eventually tell the world about Sobibor. One of the most powerful aspects of Escape from Sobibor is the way it presents the emotional pressure surrounding the prisoners rather than relying only on action. The film's strongest moments show people living under constant fear while gradually finding the courage to resist. These scenes are effective because they contrast the ordinary behavior expected inside the camp with the extraordinary decisions being made secretly by the prisoners. The tension often comes from knowing that even a small mistake could expose the resistance and place many lives in danger. The early scenes showing daily life inside Sobibor create a particularly disturbing impression. Prisoners are surrounded by strict discipline and forced labor, while the camp operates with an outward appearance of routine. The contrast between ordinary-looking activities and the terrible purpose of the camp makes these moments emotionally powerful. The prisoners may be performing assigned tasks or moving between different areas, but the audience understands that they are living under a system of mass murder. This atmosphere establishes why the later resistance becomes so important. Another memorable part of the story is the gradual development of trust among the prisoners. Instead of immediately presenting the resistance as a large organized movement, the film shows how relationships slowly become important. A quiet conversation, a warning pass between prisoners, or a moment in which one person decides to trust another can carry enormous weight. These scenes demonstrate that resistance begins not only with weapons or plans, but also with human connection. In a place designed to isolate people through fear, trust itself becomes a form of defiance. The arrival and leadership of Alexander Petrovsky provide another major emotional focus. His presence changes the possibilities facing the prisoners because he approaches their situation with determination and organization. His leadership does not magically remove the dangers around them, but it gives the resistance a clearer direction. Scenes involving his discussions with other prisoners are powerful because they show people moving from despair toward the belief that collective action might actually be possible. The secret planning scenes are filled with suspense because the audience knows that discovery could destroy everything. The prisoners have to speak carefully, exchange information discreetly, and continue behaving normally around the guards. The tension comes from the smallest details: a suspicious glance, an unexpected interruption, or a conversation that might be overheard. These moments show how resistance required not only bravery but also extraordinary self-control. The preparation for obtaining weapons adds another layer of tension. The prisoners understand that they cannot challenge armed guards with empty hands, yet acquiring weapons is extremely dangerous. The film builds suspense around the question of whether the resistance can gather enough resources without revealing its intentions. These scenes are powerful because the audience can feel how narrow the margin for error has become. Every successful step increases hope, but it also brings the prisoners closer to the moment when there will be no turning back. The day of the uprising is naturally among the film's most intense sequences. The carefully hidden resistance suddenly becomes active, and the quiet atmosphere of the camp begins to collapse. The prisoners must follow their roles while the authorities remain unaware of the full scale of what is happening. The suspense comes from watching a carefully prepared plan unfold, while knowing that a single unexpected development could cause disaster. The moment when the prisoners realize that the revolt can no longer remain secret is especially dramatic. The atmosphere changes rapidly from controlled preparation to urgent action. Prisoners begin moving toward freedom, and the sense of uncertainty becomes overwhelming. The film captures the difference between planning an escape and actually having to carry it out. Before the uprising, the prisoners could imagine different possibilities. Once the breakout begins, they have only seconds to make decisions. The mass breakout itself is one of the film's most memorable sequences because it combines hope, fear, confusion, and desperation. Large numbers of prisoners rush toward the camp's perimeter while armed personnel attempt to stop them. The scene does not present escape as an easy victory. People become separated, some are unable to move quickly enough, and others face deadly obstacles. The emotional impact comes from seeing the prisoners finally challenge the barriers that have controlled their lives for so long. The scenes surrounding the minefield are particularly tense because the prisoners cannot see every danger in front of them. They are attempting to reach the forest while dealing with fences, gunfire, panic, and hidden explosives. The uncertainty makes these moments frightening because freedom is physically close, yet death can come without warning. The sequence emphasizes how much courage was required simply to keep moving forward. Another powerful element is the contrast between the camp and the open countryside. Once the prisoners reach the forest, the visual environment changes dramatically. There are no longer walls and barracks immediately surrounding them, but safety is still far away. The forest offers concealment while also creating uncertainty. The survivors have escaped one controlled environment and entered a world where they must make their own decisions, often without knowing whom they can trust. The emotional aftermath of the escape is equally important. The survivors cannot simply celebrate because many people have been killed or left behind. Friends and relatives have been separated, and the reality of what they have experienced remains with them. These quieter moments give the story emotional depth, because they remind viewers that the revolt was not a conventional military victory. It was a desperate attempt by persecuted people to survive. The film's most powerful scenes ultimately come from the human choices made under extreme circumstances. Prisoners choose to trust one another, accept danger, protect others, and risk their own lives for the possibility of freedom. The guards may control the physical environment, but the prisoners gradually regain control over their decisions. That transformation gives the story much of its emotional strength. Perhaps the most lasting impression comes from the idea that survival itself becomes an act of resistance. Those who escaped were able to carry memories of Sobibor beyond the camp and eventually provide testimony about what happened there. Their survival gave a voice to people who had been murdered and whose stories might otherwise have been lost. The film therefore uses its most powerful scenes not simply to create suspense, but to emphasize courage, solidarity, sacrifice, and the determination to remain human under conditions designed to destroy humanity. The action and suspense in Escape from Sobibor come primarily from the prisoners' constant struggle to remain unnoticed while preparing an uprising under extremely dangerous conditions. Instead of depending on non-stop combat, the film builds tension through secrecy, surveillance, uncertainty, and the fear that the resistance could be discovered at any moment. The audience knows that the prisoners are attempting something that could cost hundreds of lives, which makes even quiet conversations and ordinary movements feel dangerous. The early tension develops through the contrast between the camp's routine and the secret activities taking place beneath it. Prisoners are expected to perform their assigned work and follow instructions, but some are secretly observing guards, exchanging information, and preparing for resistance. This creates suspense because the audience understands that two completely different realities are operating at the same time. On the surface, everything appears controlled. Underneath, an organized plan is slowly taking shape. Petruski's arrival adds another level of tension because the possibility of collective resistance becomes more realistic. His determination encourages prisoners to think beyond individual survival. However, organizing a revolt means that every participant becomes a potential target. The film uses this uncertainty effectively, showing how resistance members must carefully decide whom they can trust. A single careless conversation could expose the entire operation, making secrecy one of the most important elements of the suspense. The preparation of weapons provides another strong source of action-oriented tension. The prisoners know that they will eventually need weapons if they are going to confront armed guards. Yet obtaining them without creating suspicion is extremely risky. The scenes involving tools, workshops, movement around the camp, and interactions with guards become suspenseful because ordinary objects can suddenly become important to the escape plan. The audience is encouraged to watch small details because those details may later influence the success or failure of the revolt. The most intense suspense develops as the chosen day approaches. The prisoners have invested enormous effort into their preparations, but they cannot know exactly how the guards will react. They also have no guarantee that every participant will be able to follow the plan. The closer the uprising gets, the more dangerous the situation becomes. The prisoners must continue behaving normally even though they know that they are preparing to challenge the entire camp system. When the revolt begins, the film shifts from slow-building suspense into rapid action. Selected German personnel are attacked as part of the resistance strategy, and the prisoners attempt to secure weapons before the alarm can spread. The action is significant because it represents the moment when secret resistance becomes open confrontation. The prisoners are no longer simply planning to escape, they are actively creating a path toward freedom. The tension increases dramatically when the authorities begin to recognize that something is wrong. The resistance has only a limited amount of time before the camp can be placed under full security. Prisoners must move quickly, and any delay could result in mass casualties. The audience experiences the same uncertainty as the escapees. Will the plan remain coordinated, or will panic and confusion overwhelm it? The breakout is the film's largest action sequence. Hundreds of prisoners attempt to leave the camp while facing fences, armed guards, and other defensive obstacles. The scene becomes chaotic because everyone is trying to reach safety at once. Some prisoners move according to the plan, while others are forced to improvise. The action is therefore not presented as a clean military operation. It reflects the reality of desperate people trying to survive under extreme pressure. The perimeter and minefield sections add another layer of suspense because the prisoners cannot simply run in a straight line toward freedom. Hidden dangers and defensive barriers create uncertainty about every route. Gunfire increases the panic, while explosions can suddenly change the movement of the crowd. These moments emphasize that even after the prisoners overcome one obstacle, another danger may be waiting immediately ahead. The forest sequences create a different kind of suspense. The action becomes quieter, but the danger does not disappear. Survivors must hide from search parties and avoid revealing their location. A distant sound, movement through the trees, or unfamiliar person can create fear. The tension now comes from whether the escapees can remain invisible long enough to survive. Another important element is the uncertainty surrounding individual survival. During a mass escape, people become separated from friends and relatives. Some prisoners reach safety while others are captured or killed. This unpredictability makes the escape emotionally intense because there is no guarantee that characters who were together earlier will remain together afterward. The audience is constantly aware that survival can change from one moment to the next. The film's suspense also comes from the fact that the prisoners are operating with very limited resources. They are exhausted, underfed, and surrounded by forces with greater weapons and authority. This imbalance makes their success seem uncertain. The resistance cannot rely on superior strength. It has to depend on timing, deception, courage, and numbers. Every successful step therefore feels significant because it occurs despite overwhelming disadvantages. What makes the action especially effective is that it is connected to the human stakes of the story. The escape is not simply an exciting sequence. It represents the prisoners' attempt to reclaim their lives. Every fence crossed and every danger avoided has a deeper meaning, because the characters know what will happen if they are captured. The physical action therefore carries emotional weight throughout the film. By the end of the escape, the nature of the suspense changes once again. The prisoners who reach the forest are technically outside the camp, but they are still being hunted. Their struggle becomes one of hiding, traveling, finding assistance, and surviving in occupied territory. The immediate action may slow down, but the danger remains. This continuation prevents the escape from feeling like an easy victory and reinforces the harsh reality of their situation. Ultimately, the action and suspense of Escape from Sobibor are strongest because they are built around uncertainty and human courage. The film combines secret planning, sudden violence, mass movement, dangerous obstacles, and survival in the wilderness to create a tense narrative. More importantly, the action serves the larger story. Ordinary prisoners are placed in an extraordinary situation and decide to risk everything for a chance at freedom. That combination of danger, determination, and emotional stakes gives the revolt its lasting dramatic power. Escape from Sobibor is based on a real historical event, and its central story is rooted in the documented uprising at the Sobibor extermination camp on October 14, 1943. The film presents the prisoners' resistance, the leadership of Alexander Petrovsky, the coordinated revolt, and the mass escape as the major events that shape the historical narrative. Although the production is a dramatized television film rather than a documentary, its foundation is closely connected to survivor testimonies and historical accounts of what happened at Sobibor. One of the strongest historical elements is the portrayal of Sobibor as a Nazi extermination camp established in occupied Poland as part of Operation Reinhard. The camp was not simply a conventional detention facility. Its primary purpose was mass murder, and large numbers of Jews were transported there from different parts of German-occupied Europe. The film's depiction of prisoners being forced into labor while living under the constant threat of death reflects the broader historical reality of the camp. The character of Alexander Petrsky is also based on a real person. Petrsky was a Soviet Jewish prisoner of war who was deported to Sobibor in 1943. His military background and leadership experience became important during the planning of the uprising. The film uses his character as one of the central figures through whom viewers can understand how a group of prisoners transformed an idea of resistance into a coordinated attempt to escape. The cooperation between prisoners from different backgrounds is another historically important aspect. Sobibor held Jews from several European countries, and the resistance involved people with different languages, experiences, and skills. Bringing these individuals together was not easy, but the shared danger created a strong reason for cooperation. The film's emphasis on trust and communication reflects the complicated process through which the resistance developed. The general structure of the revolt is also historically grounded. Prisoners secretly organized an operation in which selected German personnel were attacked before the larger escape began. The intention was to obtain weapons and create enough confusion to give the prisoners a chance to break through the camp's security system. This strategy is one of the central historical features of the Sobibor uprising, and is an important reason the revolt succeeded in allowing a large number of prisoners to escape. The mass breakout is another major point where the film follows historical events. Once the resistance could no longer remain secret, prisoners rushed toward the camp's perimeter. Many attempted to cross fences and defensive areas while facing armed guards and other obstacles. Some escaped into the surrounding countryside, while others were killed during the attempt. The film's presentation of the breakout as chaotic and dangerous is consistent with survivor accounts describing the confusion and extreme risks involved. The minefield surrounding parts of the camp also reflects the historical danger faced by escapees. The prisoners were attempting to cross a heavily secured area without having complete knowledge of where mines had been placed. Some people were killed during the breakout, while others managed to reach the surrounding forests and continue their escape. This aspect of the story demonstrates why escaping from Sobibor was far more complicated than simply passing through a fence. However, viewers should remember that a dramatized film cannot reproduce every historical detail exactly. Characters may be combined, conversations may be reconstructed, and certain events may be arranged differently for storytelling purposes. The filmmakers had to transform a complicated historical record into a narrative that could be followed by an audience. As a result, some personal interactions and individual moments should be understood as dramatic representations rather than exact recordings of conversations that occurred in 1943. The film also places significant attention on individual characters because this makes the enormous historical event easier to understand emotionally. In reality, the uprising involved many prisoners whose contributions cannot all be represented equally in a feature-length production. Some characters receive greater attention because they help communicate particular aspects of resistance, courage, fear, or sacrifice. This does not mean that the people receiving less screen time were historically unimportant. Another important historical point is what happened to Sobibor after the uprising. The revolt embarrassed the Nazi authorities and contributed to the decision to dismantle the camp. The remaining structures were destroyed, and attempts were made to erase evidence of the mass killings that had occurred there. The site was altered to conceal its original purpose, but survivor testimony and later historical research preserved the memory of the camp and its victims. The fate of the survivors is also an important part of the historical story. Not everyone who escaped on October 14 survived the war. Some were captured or killed in the months that followed, while others survived by hiding, joining partisan groups, or receiving assistance from people outside the camp. Alexander Petrsky eventually reached Soviet-controlled territory and later became one of the important witnesses connected to the Sobibor uprising. Perhaps the most significant measure of the film's historical accuracy is its preservation of the central truth. Prisoners at Sobibor organized a large-scale revolt against a Nazi extermination camp and succeeded in escaping in substantial numbers. The uprising demonstrated extraordinary courage under circumstances in which the prisoners had almost no conventional advantages. Their actions also provided survivors with the opportunity to testify about what had happened inside the camp. At the same time, the film should be viewed alongside historical sources rather than treated as a complete historical record. Movies naturally compress time, dramatize relationships, and focus attention on particular characters. For a deeper understanding of Sobibor, survivor testimonies, historical research, archival evidence, and scholarly studies provide additional context that a 2-hour dramatization cannot fully contain. Overall, Escape from Sobibor remains historically significant because its central events are based on one of the most important acts of prisoner resistance during the Holocaust. The film combines dramatization with a real historical foundation, allowing audiences to understand the fear, planning, courage, and enormous risks involved in the uprising. While certain scenes are shaped for dramatic storytelling, the core story of resistance, revolt, escape, and survival reflects a genuine event that took place at Sobibor in 1943. One of the strongest themes in Escape from Sobibor is resistance against oppression. The prisoners are placed inside a system designed to convince them that resistance is impossible, yet they gradually reject that idea. Their uprising demonstrates that even people who have been stripped of almost every form of power can still make choices that challenge their oppressors. The resistance does not begin with a large army or superior weapons. It begins with individuals deciding that they will no longer accept complete helplessness as their only option. Another major theme is the power of unity. Sobibor contains prisoners from different countries and backgrounds, and their differences could easily have prevented cooperation. Instead, their shared circumstances gradually bring them together. The escape plan succeeds because people with different abilities contribute toward the same objective. The story suggests that unity can become a powerful source of strength when individuals are facing an enemy far stronger than any one person. The film also explores human dignity. The Nazi camp system attempts to reduce prisoners to numbers and forced laborers, treating them as if their individual identities have no value. Resistance challenges that dehumanization. When prisoners organize, communicate, protect one another, and make their own decisions, they reclaim a sense of identity that the camp authorities are trying to destroy. Their actions show that dignity can survive even under extreme conditions. Courage is another central message. The prisoners are not fearless people who suddenly become heroic. They experience fear throughout the story, and that fear is understandable because the consequences of failure are deadly. Their courage comes from acting despite knowing the risks. The uprising therefore presents bravery as a decision rather than the absence of fear. The prisoners understand the danger but choose to move forward anyway. The story also emphasizes hope under impossible circumstances. Life inside Sobibor gives prisoners very few reasons to believe that they will survive. Yet the resistance begins with the belief that another future might still be possible. Hope does not guarantee success, but it motivates people to prepare, cooperate, and take risks. The escape demonstrates how hope can influence behavior even when the surrounding circumstances appear completely hopeless. Another important theme is sacrifice. The prisoners know that an uprising could result in deaths, and many people do lose their lives during the revolt and its aftermath. Some participants are willing to take enormous personal risks to create an opportunity for others. This gives the escape a deeper meaning. It is not simply an attempt to save oneself. It is also an effort to give as many prisoners as possible a chance to survive. The film strongly communicates the importance of trust. Inside a place where betrayal could mean death, trusting another person becomes extremely difficult. The resistance can only function when prisoners are willing to rely on one another. They must keep secrets, follow instructions, and believe that others will remain committed to the plan. Trust therefore becomes one of the foundations of the uprising. Leadership is another important theme, particularly through Alexander Petrsky. His role demonstrates how leadership can provide direction during a crisis. However, the story does not suggest that one individual creates the uprising alone. Petrsky's leadership becomes effective because other prisoners are willing to participate and take risks. The message is that strong leadership and collective action must work together. The story also explores the idea of survival as resistance. Escaping Sobibor is not only about physically leaving the camp. Those who survive become witnesses to what happened there. Their memories and testimonies preserve the history of people who were murdered and unable to tell their own stories. In this sense, staying alive becomes another form of defiance against a system that intended to erase both lives and memories. Another powerful message concerns memory and historical truth. The Nazi authorities attempted to destroy evidence of the crimes committed at Sobibor and ultimately dismantled the camp. Yet the destruction of buildings could not erase the experiences of survivors. Those who escaped carried the history with them. The film reminds audiences that remembering victims and recording historical events are essential responsibilities, particularly when perpetrators attempt to conceal their crimes. The theme of freedom is also central. At the beginning of the story, freedom appears almost impossible because the prisoners are surrounded by physical and psychological barriers. During the revolt, freedom becomes something they actively pursue. But the film also shows that escaping a camp does not immediately create a peaceful life. The survivors must continue hiding and moving through dangerous territory. Freedom is therefore portrayed as something precious but difficult to achieve and protect. The story further examines the value of individual choice. The prisoners are constantly told where to work, where to go, and how to behave. The resistance gives them an opportunity to make decisions for themselves. Choosing to participate in the uprising means accepting enormous consequences, but it also means reclaiming control over their own actions. This makes the revolt a struggle not only against physical imprisonment but against the destruction of personal agency. Finally, Escape from Sobibor carries a broader message about the human capacity to resist cruelty. The story does not suggest that courage always guarantees survival. Many people who resisted were killed. Instead, it demonstrates that oppressive systems cannot completely control the human spirit. The prisoners' ability to organize, trust one another, and fight for freedom remains significant even in the face of overwhelming power. Taken together, these themes make the story much more than an account of an escape. It becomes a powerful examination of courage, solidarity, dignity, sacrifice, memory, and hope. The prisoners' actions show that resistance can begin with a small decision and grow into collective action. Their struggle reminds viewers that even in the darkest circumstances, people can choose to protect one another, preserve their identity, and fight for the possibility of freedom. The uprising at Sobibor did not simply end when the surviving prisoners disappeared into the surrounding countryside. The revolt created a serious crisis for the Nazi authorities because a large number of prisoners had escaped from a camp whose security system had been designed to make escape nearly impossible. The authorities immediately began searching the surrounding region, while those who remained inside Sobibor faced an uncertain fate. The revolt had exposed a major weakness in the camp system and forced the Nazi administration to respond quickly. After the escape, the remaining prisoners were subjected to the consequences of the uprising. The camp authorities understood that the revolt had demonstrated that their system of control could be challenged from within. Security measures were reinforced while German personnel attempted to regain complete control. At the same time, the Nazis began taking steps that would eventually lead to the destruction of Sobibor itself. The decision to dismantle the camp was connected to the broader Nazi effort to conceal evidence of mass murder. Sobibor had served as an extermination center where enormous numbers of Jews had been murdered as part of Operation Reinhardt. After the revolt, the authorities worked to erase the physical traces of the camp. Buildings and structures were removed or destroyed, and the area was altered so that it would no longer openly reveal what had taken place there. This destruction was not simply an administrative decision. It was part of a deliberate attempt to hide the crimes committed at Sobibor. The Nazis understood that the existence of the camp and its killing operations could provide evidence of their systematic murder of European Jews. By dismantling the site and changing its appearance, they attempted to make the location appear ordinary and prevent future investigators from easily identifying what had happened there. The destruction of Sobibor, however, could not erase the memories carried by the survivors. Prisoners who had escaped had witnessed the camp's operations and could describe what they had seen. Their testimony became extremely important because the physical evidence was being destroyed. Every survivor who lived through the uprising represented a source of information about the camp, its victims, and the resistance that took place there. The escapees themselves faced very different futures. Some managed to hide in forests or receive assistance from civilians. Others joined Soviet partisan units or continued trying to reach areas where they could find protection. Some were captured and killed in the months after the revolt. Their different experiences demonstrate that escaping Sobibor did not guarantee survival. The danger continued throughout the German occupation. Alexander Petrovsky became one of the most important surviving figures connected to the uprising. After escaping, he eventually reached Soviet-controlled territory and later served with Soviet forces. His experiences at Sobibor became part of the historical record of the revolt. Through survivors such as Petrsky, the story of the uprising could be preserved even after the physical camp had been destroyed. The revolt also had significance beyond the immediate survival of the prisoners. It demonstrated that organized resistance was possible even inside a Nazi extermination center. The prisoners had faced overwhelming disadvantages, yet they managed to coordinate an uprising and allow a large number of people to escape. Their actions challenged the idea that victims inside the killing centers were completely powerless. The closing of Sobibor did not mean that the crimes committed there were forgotten. Although the Nazis attempted to erase the site, the memory of the victims survived through testimony, historical research, and later investigations. The stories told by survivors helped establish a clearer understanding of how the camp functioned and how the Nazi extermination program operated. The fate of the camp's victims remained at the center of this history. Most of those deported to Sobibor were murdered before the revolt, and they never had the opportunity to escape or tell their own stories. The survivors therefore carried a heavy responsibility. Their memories preserved not only the story of the uprising, but also the existence of people whose lives had been deliberately erased. In the years after the war, Sobibor became an important subject of historical investigation and remembrance. Survivors gave accounts of the camp, researchers examined available evidence, and the location itself became a site associated with Holocaust memory. The physical destruction carried out by the Nazis could not prevent historians from reconstructing the events through survivor testimony and other evidence. The revolt therefore changed Sobibor's history permanently. Before October 1943, the camp represented a place where the Nazi authorities exercised almost complete control over the prisoners. After the uprising, it became remembered as the site of one of the most significant acts of organized prisoner resistance during the Holocaust. The escape did not undo the enormous number of lives lost there, but it demonstrated that the prisoners were capable of challenging the system that had been built to destroy them. Ultimately, what remained after Sobibor was not the camp itself but the memory of what had happened there. The Nazis could destroy buildings, remove evidence, and attempt to transform the landscape, but they could not completely silence the survivors. Their testimonies carried the story beyond the borders of the camp and across generations. The legacy of Sobibor therefore rests not only on the tragedy that occurred there, but also on the courage of those who resisted, escaped, survived, and preserved the truth. The historical legacy of Sobibor is shaped by two realities that can never be separated: the enormous crime committed there and the extraordinary resistance carried out by the prisoners. Sobibor was established as a Nazi extermination camp during the Holocaust, and the overwhelming majority of people sent there were murdered. Yet the uprising of October 14, 1943, created a different chapter in the camp's history. The prisoners demonstrated that even within a killing center built around secrecy, terror, and total control, organized resistance was possible. One of the most important parts of Sobibor's legacy is the survival of eyewitnesses. The Nazi authorities attempted to destroy the camp and remove evidence after the revolt, but prisoners who escaped carried their memories beyond the site. Their accounts helped historians understand how Sobibor operated, what prisoners experienced, and how the uprising was organized. Without these survivors, much of the human story behind the camp could have been lost or distorted. The uprising also became an important example of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. Resistance took many different forms, including armed rebellion, underground organizing, escape attempts, cultural preservation, and acts of mutual assistance. Sobibor demonstrated that resistance could occur, even in an extermination camp, where the Nazis had created conditions specifically designed to prevent prisoners from organizing. The revolt therefore became a powerful historical example of people fighting back under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Alexander Petrsky became one of the central figures associated with this legacy. His leadership during the uprising helped organize prisoners from different backgrounds around a common objective. His later testimony contributed to the preservation of the revolt's history. Over time, his name became closely connected with the story of Sobibor and with the broader history of resistance during the Holocaust. The legacy of Sobibor is also connected to the Nazi attempt to erase evidence. After the camp was dismantled, the site was altered in an effort to conceal its original purpose. This reflected a broader effort by the Nazi regime to destroy traces of mass murder as the war progressed. However, physical destruction could not completely eliminate the historical record. Survivor testimonies, investigations, documents, archaeological research, and later memorial efforts helped reconstruct what had happened. Another important legacy concerns the victims themselves. Sobibor was not simply a location associated with an escape or military-style uprising. It was a place where hundreds of thousands of people were deported as part of the Nazi extermination program, with most being murdered shortly after arrival. Remembering Sobibor therefore means remembering the victims whose lives were destroyed before they had any opportunity to resist or escape. The revolt is historically significant, but it must always be understood within the much larger tragedy of the Holocaust. The story also carries a lesson about the importance of historical testimony. Survivors did not simply preserve memories for themselves. Many eventually became witnesses whose accounts helped later generations understand the Holocaust. Their descriptions gave a human dimension to events that can otherwise seem distant or abstract. Through their voices, historians could learn about the daily reality of the camp and the extraordinary risks involved in the uprising. Sobibor's legacy extends into Holocaust education as well. The story demonstrates how systems of mass murder were organized and how ordinary human beings were placed under extreme conditions of terror. At the same time, it challenges simplistic ideas about victims being completely passive. The prisoners at Sobibor made plans, built networks of trust, gathered information, acquired weapons, and eventually launched a coordinated revolt. Their resistance is an important part of understanding the complexity of human behavior during the Holocaust. The historical significance of the escape is also found in the lives that continued afterward. Every prisoner who survived the revolt had the possibility of rebuilding a life after the war, although many carried deep emotional scars and memories of those they had lost. Some survivors became witnesses, while others lived more privately. Their continued existence itself contradicted the Nazi objective of completely eliminating the communities they had targeted. The legacy of Sobibor also demonstrates the limits of physical destruction as a method of historical erasure. The camp's buildings could be demolished, the landscape could be changed, and evidence could be hidden, but the memories of survivors could not be destroyed in the same way. Their stories became part of the historical record and allowed future generations to learn about the crimes committed there. Today, Sobibor is remembered as both a site of immense suffering and a place of courageous resistance. Memorial efforts at the former campsite have helped preserve the memory of those who were murdered and those who participated in the revolt. Archaeological discoveries and historical research have also contributed to a more detailed understanding of the camp structure and operation. These efforts are important because they connect physical evidence with the testimony of survivors. The story of Sobibor also carries a broader message about human dignity. The prisoners had been placed in circumstances designed to strip them of identity, freedom, and hope. Their revolt demonstrated that the Nazi system could not completely destroy their ability to make choices. Their resistance did not erase the terrible losses suffered at Sobibor, but it showed that oppression does not automatically eliminate courage or solidarity. For modern audiences, the historical legacy of Sobibor carries a responsibility to remember accurately. The story should not be reduced to an action sequence or treated only as an escape adventure. Behind the revolt were countless individual lives, families, communities, and cultures that were destroyed. Understanding the uprising properly requires remembering both the courage of the survivors and the enormous scale of the crime committed against those who did not survive. Ultimately, Sobibor's historical legacy rests on memory, testimony, resistance, and remembrance. The Nazis attempted to make the camp disappear, but the survivors ensured that its story continued. Their experiences helped preserve the names, suffering, courage, and humanity of people who were targeted for destruction. The revolt remains one of the most remarkable acts of resistance during the Holocaust, while the history of the camp itself stands as a permanent warning about what can happen when hatred, dehumanization, and state-organized violence are allowed to become a system. Escape from Sobibor remains a powerful historical drama because it tells a story that combines tragedy, resistance, courage, and survival. The film does not present Sobibor simply as a place from which prisoners wanted to escape. It shows how people living under an organized system of terror gradually developed the determination to challenge it. The story becomes increasingly intense as the prisoners move from silent endurance to secret resistance, and finally toward an organized revolt. One of the film's greatest strengths is its focus on the human side of the historical event. Instead of treating the prisoners as an anonymous crowd, The story gives attention to their fear, relationships, hopes, and decisions. This makes the events easier for viewers to understand emotionally. The prisoners are shown as individuals who have families, memories, personalities, and different reasons for wanting to survive. Their struggle therefore feels personal rather than distant. The development of the resistance is another major strength. The uprising does not appear as something that happens without preparation. The prisoners first have to build trust, exchange information, study the camp's routines, and identify people who can be relied upon. These preparations create suspense because the audience understands how much is at stake. Every secret conversation and every small act of cooperation becomes part of a much larger plan. Alexander Petrovsky serves as an important center of the story because his leadership helps transform scattered hopes into organized action. His presence gives the resistance direction, but the film also makes clear that the revolt depends on collective participation. The courage of one leader would not have been enough. Hundreds of prisoners had to take risks, follow the plan, and make their own decisions when circumstances became unpredictable. The uprising itself provides the film with its most intense dramatic material. The secret operation eventually becomes an open struggle, and prisoners must move quickly before the guards can regain complete control. The escape scenes combine action with enormous emotional stakes. Every obstacle represents more than a physical barrier because the prisoners understand what awaits them if they are captured. The breakout is particularly powerful because it is not portrayed as an easy victory. The prisoners face gunfire, fences, dangerous ground, confusion, and the possibility of separation from loved ones. Some survive the escape while others are killed. This prevents the story from becoming a simple triumph, and instead reflects the painful reality of the historical event. Freedom comes at an enormous cost. The film's treatment of survival after the revolt also adds depth to the conclusion. Escaping Sobibor does not immediately mean reaching safety. The survivors still have to hide from German forces, find food, travel through unfamiliar territory, and decide whom they can trust. This continuation is important because it shows that the struggle for survival extended far beyond the camp's fences. Historically, the story carries even greater significance. The Sobibor uprising was a real event that occurred on October 14, 1943, and it became one of the most notable prisoner revolts during the Holocaust. The film dramatizes this history for an audience, meaning that some individual conversations, character interactions, and sequences are presented for storytelling purposes. Nevertheless, the central events, the resistance, Petrovsky's leadership, the coordinated revolt, the mass escape, and the destruction of the camp, are rooted in historical evidence and survivor testimony. The film also succeeds because its central themes remain meaningful beyond the specific historical setting. Courage, unity, dignity, sacrifice, trust, hope, and the importance of memory are all woven into the story. The prisoners demonstrate that resistance can begin with small decisions. Trusting another person, protecting a fellow prisoner, sharing information, or refusing to surrender hope. These choices eventually contribute to a collective action far larger than any individual could have achieved alone. Perhaps the most important message is that survival can itself become a form of resistance. The Nazis attempted not only to murder people but also to erase evidence of their crimes. Prisoners who escaped carried memories of Sobibor with them. Their testimonies became an important part of preserving the historical truth. The survivors therefore became witnesses for those who were murdered and could never tell their own stories. The emotional impact of escape from Sobibor comes from this combination of tragedy and defiance. The film never allows the audience to forget the terrible reality surrounding the revolt, yet it also shows that the prisoners retained the ability to make choices. Their escape does not undo the suffering of the victims, but it demonstrates that the Nazi system was not completely successful in destroying the human spirit of those it persecuted. As a historical drama, the film is most effective when viewed as an introduction to the real events rather than as a complete documentary record. Viewers who want a deeper understanding of Sobibor can explore survivor testimonies, historical research, and evidence from the former campsite. These sources add important details and help separate dramatic representation from documented history. In the end, the story of Sobibor is not simply about escaping from a camp. It is about people who were placed in a situation where almost every path seemed to lead toward death, yet they still found ways to cooperate and fight for the possibility of freedom. Their uprising required extraordinary courage because they knew the consequences of failure. Many did not survive, but the revolt allowed hundreds to escape and ensured that the story of Sobibor would not disappear completely. The lasting importance of escape from Sobibor lies in its ability to connect a historical event with the human experiences behind it. It reminds viewers that history is made up of individual lives and difficult choices, not only dates and statistics. The prisoners' resistance, the sacrifices made during the breakout, and the determination of survivors to preserve the truth all contribute to a legacy that continues to matter. Ultimately, Sobibor stands as a place of profound tragedy, but it is also remembered as a place where prisoners refused to surrender completely. Their resistance cannot erase the enormous crime committed there, but it remains a powerful example of courage under extreme oppression. The survivors carried that story beyond the camp, and through their testimony, the memory of those who were murdered continued to live. That is what gives Escape from Sobibor its lasting impact. It is a story of suffering, but it is also a story of resistance. It is a story of loss, but also of survival. Above all, it is a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, people can choose solidarity over isolation, courage over surrender, and remembrance over silence. Thanks for watching.